You won't believe what happened one sunny afternoon at my lake cabin. I was just minding my own business, firing up the grill, ready to enjoy some peaceful BBQ time surrounded by nature. It was supposed to be a simple, relaxing day, but then, out of nowhere, things took a wild turn when one of the HOA neighbors, yes, the infamous HOA Karen, decided to call 911 on me. I know, calling emergency services over a barbecue. It sounds crazy, right? But that's exactly what happened. This HOA Karen had been giving me trouble for weeks, nitpicking every little thing about how I maintain my property or how I enjoy my time at the cabin. You know the type, the neighbor who thinks they're the neighborhood sheriff policing everyone else's business. Well, this time she went way too far. As I stood there flipping burgers, hearing the distant sound of sirens approaching, I realized this was going to be more than just another petty dispute. The tension was thick. I had no idea what to expect next. What happened over the next 7 minutes completely changed everything. The call she made to 911 sparked a chain of events that no one in the HOA saw coming. In fact, by the time those 7 minutes were up, I was the one holding the power. Somehow, against all odds, I ended up evicting not just Karen, but the entire HOA from the community. It felt surreal, like something out of a movie. But how did it all unfold? What was it about that 911 call that flipped the script so dramatically? And how did a peaceful BBQ turn into a showdown that shook the whole neighborhood? Stay tuned, because this story is just getting started, and you're going to want to hear every detail. Trust me, you won't see this coming. Before that day, I never imagined that living in a quiet lake community could turn into such a headache. The HOA had always been a source of small annoyances, rules about lawn decorations, noise restrictions, and endless emails about what you can or can't do on your own property. But with Karen, it was different. She wasn't just following the rules. She seemed to enjoy making life difficult for everyone else, especially me. I'd try to keep things low-key, respectful, and friendly, but she pushed every boundary. The problem started when I first bought the cabin. It was my escape place to unwind, grill some food, and enjoy the lake. But Karen seemed to think my idea of relaxation threatened her version of perfect neighborhood. She'd complain about the smoke from my grill, the sound of my music, even the way I parked my truck. I thought it was just petty jealousy at first, but soon her actions became more deliberate, like she was on a mission to make me miserable. Then came the day of the 911 call. I was in the middle of setting up the grill with friends and family nearby when suddenly police cars showed up. Confused, I tried to explain what was going on. But Karen had already planted her story, claiming there was some kind of emergency or disturbance. The officers looked skeptical, but you could feel the tension rise as neighbors started gathering, whispering, watching. What none of us knew was that this moment was about to trigger something bigger, something that would change the entire HOA power structure. Behind the scenes, there were old conflicts, secrets about how the HOA was run, and cracks in their leadership no one talked about openly. Karen's call wasn't just about the BBQ. It was the spark that lit a fuse waiting to blow. But what exactly was going on behind those HOA meetings and friendly facades? And how could one 911 call set off a chain reaction that would leave the whole community shaken? Keep watching. This story is far from over. As things escalated, I started to learn more about the HOA's inner workings, and it wasn't pretty. The community that looked calm and friendly on the surface was actually tangled in power struggles and long-held grudges. Karen was just the loudest voice, but there were others behind the scenes, quietly pulling strings and protecting their own interests. I found out that some board members weren't as interested in keeping the neighborhood peaceful as they claimed. They were more focused on control and enforcing rules that seemed unfair or even arbitrary. Meanwhile, Karen's relentless behavior wasn't just about the rules. It was personal. She seemed to take every chance to push me and others around, and I started to suspect she had a history of targeting people who didn't fit her idea of how things should be. Some neighbors confided in me about past run-ins with her, and it became clear that this wasn't the first time she'd stirred up trouble by using official channels like the HOA complaints process or, apparently, emergency services. On my side, the tension wasn't just about defending my right to enjoy my property. It was about standing up against a system that felt stacked against regular homeowners. The 911 call wasn't just an annoying interruption. It was a symbol of how far Karen and the HOA would go to intimidate anyone who pushed back. But I wasn't about to let that happen quietly. I started talking to other neighbors who'd also felt the squeeze, gathering stories and quietly building a case. The feeling was growing something had to change, yet every step I took seemed to stir more conflict. Karen doubled down, sending more warnings involving more people trying to isolate me. The HOA board meetings became battlegrounds, full of tense arguments and whispered alliances. It felt like the whole neighborhood was split in two, and I was right in the middle. The question was, how would this all end? Would the HOA keep their grip, or was there a way to finally break free from their control? There was no turning back now. The clock was ticking, and the next moves would decide everything as the days passed. The tension in the neighborhood grew thick enough to cut with a knife. Every glance from Karen felt loaded. Every whispered conversation behind closed doors seemed like it was about me. I wasn't just some guy enjoying a barbecue anymore. I'd become the focal point of a battle that had been simmering for far too long. The HOA meetings, once dull and routine, turned into heated confrontations. Karen and her allies pushed harder, trying to use every rule in their book to wear me down. Notices piled up, warnings escalated, and the community seemed divided like never before. But I wasn't backing down. I kept reaching out to neighbors who were quietly fed up with the HOA's heavy-handed tactics. There were stories of unfair fines, favoritism, and even instances where the HOA board ignored their own rules. People were scared to speak out publicly, afraid of retaliation that only made me more determined. I started gathering evidence, documenting every unfair move, every misuse of power. It was risky, but I knew the truth needed to come out. Meanwhile, Karen's calls to authorities became more frequent, each one trying to make my life harder. The 911 call over the BBQ was just the start. It was clear she wanted to push me out. But what she didn't realize was that with every attempt to silence me, I was only getting stronger, more focused. The community's patience was wearing thin, and behind the scenes, alliances were shifting. The calm lake waters hid a storm, brewing beneath. One evening, as another tense HOA meeting stretched late into the night, the pressure finally reached a breaking point. Voices rose, tempers flared, and the fragile balance of power started to crumble. I could feel it in the air. Something big was about to happen. Everyone was waiting, holding their breath, unsure who would come out on top. The quiet, peaceful lake cabin I loved had become the epicenter of a neighborhood showdown that no one could have predicted. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get more intense, the next move changed everything. But what was coming next? That's the part you don't want to miss. Just when I thought the situation couldn't get any more intense, a new twist flipped the entire neighborhood upside down. Late one night, as I was reviewing the documents I'd gathered, I stumbled upon something unexpected: an old email thread that exposed a secret agreement between the HOA board and a local developer. It wasn't just about keeping the neighborhood perfect anymore. Apparently, there was a plan to sell off part of the community's land for a commercial project, something that would drastically change the peaceful lakefront everyone cherished. This revelation explained a lot: the sudden strictness, the push to control homeowners like me, and Karen's aggressive behavior. It wasn't just personal vendetta. It was about protecting interests that benefited a few at the expense of the entire community. Suddenly, my fight wasn't just about a BBQ or petty HOA rules. It was about something much bigger, about the future of the neighborhood itself. I knew this would make Karen and the board furious if it got out. But sharing this secret could unite the neighbors who had been quietly suffering under the HOA's heavy hand. I began reaching out to more people, carefully showing them the evidence. Whispers turned into talks, and talks grew into plans for a showdown that could either save or destroy the community. Meanwhile, Curran's calls to authorities increased in desperation, trying to discredit me and silence anyone who stood with me. The atmosphere grew more charged with every passing day. The HOA meetings were no longer just about rules, they became war zones, with neighbors taking sides and tensions boiling over. The peaceful lake cabin I once escaped to now felt like a battleground. And as the conflict escalated, I realized this wasn't just a fight against Karen or the HOA. Anymore, it was a fight for justice, for the neighborhood's soul. But with stakes this high, how far would Karen and the HOA go to protect their secret? And what would I risk to expose the truth? The next chapter is coming, and it's more intense than anything you've heard. The day everything came to a head was unlike any other. Armed with the proof of the HOA's secret deal and backed by a growing number of neighbors who had finally found their voice, I called for an emergency community meeting at the Lake Pavilion. The air was thick with tension. Everyone knew this was the moment the neighborhood's fate would be decided. Karen showed up, of course, flanked by a few board members who still clung to power, their faces tight with frustration and fear. I laid out the evidence clearly, piece by piece, exposing the shady agreement that threatened to sell off our cherished land without any real input from the community. The room went silent, then erupted with murmurs and gasps. People who had felt powerless for years suddenly felt hope and outrage in equal measure. Karen tried to interrupt, to spin the story her way, but her words fell flat against the weight of truth. Neighbors began sharing their own experiences, fines, threats, and the pressure they'd faced under this corrupt HOA leadership. It was clear this wasn't just about a BBQ or petty disputes anymore. This was about reclaiming our neighborhood and protecting the lakefront we all loved, in an unexpected turn. A few of the more moderate HOA members, realizing they'd been kept in the dark themselves, stood up and sided with the community. Together, we pushed for a vote to dissolve the current board and form a new, transparent committee with clear checks and balances. The vote was overwhelming. Karen and her allies had lost their grip, but just when it seemed like the fight was over, another shock hit. The developer who'd been planning the commercial project withdrew their offer, citing the growing community resistance. It was a massive win, but the real surprise came moments later. One of Karen's closest supporters quietly admitted they had been acting under pressure from outside interests, hinting that there were bigger forces at play behind the scenes. The neighborhood had won for now. But the battle for the lake cabins. Peace wasn't completely over. What came next? Well, that's a story for another day. After the vote, the atmosphere in the neighborhood changed almost overnight. The old HOA board was officially dissolved, and a new committee formed with members who genuinely cared about the community's well-being. Meetings became more open, transparent, and focused on making the lake cabin area a place everyone could enjoy without fear of petty disputes or hidden agendas. It felt like a fresh start, not just for me, but for all the neighbors who had quietly suffered under the previous leadership. Karen and her closest allies quietly packed up and moved on, their grip broken. While it wasn't easy letting go of the tension and suspicion that had built up over months, the neighborhood slowly began to heal. I found myself spending more time outside again, grilling by the lake, laughing with friends, and enjoying the peaceful retreat I dreamed of when I first bought the cabin. One of the biggest lessons I learned through all this was the power of standing up not just for yourself, but for the entire community. When we work together, even the most entrenched problems can be challenged and changed. The HOA's secret deal had been a wake-up call. A reminder that sometimes the people in charge aren't always looking out for everyone's best interest. But the community's response proved that transparency and unity can make a difference. Of course, the hint that bigger forces had been involved meant that the fight for the neighborhood's future wasn't entirely over. But for now, the lake cabin remains a place of peace and freedom. This story shows that no matter how tough the challenge, standing firm and speaking up can lead to real change. Thanks for joining me on this journey. If you've ever dealt with a tough HOA or faced neighborhood drama, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life stories like this.